So we've all had a chance to witness the chaos and mayhem that appears to be everything that Donald Trump brings to the table, and certainly with this tariff war that he's initiated with Canada and by extension the rest of the world, has caused an awful lot of upheaval in the world. For some places it actually represents a bit of an opportunity. Now in Canada, we have been hearing our own political leaders, like the Prime Minister, talk about how it's time to not totally disentangle ourselves from the Americans, but to do so at least to a degree that we're not totally reliant upon them for anything. So whether that's militarily, economically, for the purposes of trade, what have you, we just don't want to have anybody, including our erstwhile best friend and neighbor and ally, to have the kind of influence over us where they could actually cause us harm if that relationship were to change for the worst. And so what we have is an attempt to identify all the sectors and all the areas where we can get our act together economically, so that we don't have to rely a lot upon the Americans. Sorry, I'm at a really busy intersection here, and I'm going to do my very best not to get killed. And all sorts of things happening. My camera's migrating on its own. Anyways, back to my little story here. So that's where we get the Bill 5 and the Bill C5 and all of those 5 bills that are basically intent upon running roughshod over First Nations and treaty rights and that sort of thing. Okay, anyways, so that whole thing behind those pieces of legislation are to get ourselves into a position where we can build up our industrial infrastructure and our critical minerals and all of that sort of stuff to the point where we can compete on the world stage without having to be overly reliant upon the Americans. So one such area, and that's what today's video is all about, is wind power. Now, I did an article on my site about wind power a couple of days ago with the Oneida group down in southwestern Ontario, forming a wind farm, a turbine farm, and also a battery storage farm. Not a place to store batteries, but a place to have batteries that store energy that is generated by these wind turbines. And that project makes an awful lot of sense. And so here I am a couple of days later, and I'm going to talk to you about the province of Nova Scotia, which is embarking upon another little thing that makes sense, and that is to harness the more than available storehouse or potential of wind power, to harness that wind power and to not only meet the needs of the province of Nova Scotia on its own, but also to generate excess electricity that can be then fed into the grid, with the primary customer being the northeastern United States, primarily being the states in what we know of as New England. So, what does Donald Trump have to do with this? Well, in the United States, no less than 15% of the electricity on their power grid is generated through renewable sources of energy. And wind is the one that represents the highest percentage of those renewable sources of energy. But the thing about wind and Donald Trump is that they don't get along. And Donald Trump is more of an oil and gas guy. He's in the back pocket of the oil and gas interests, so they've been doing the big industrial poo-poo of wind turbines, and Trump himself has called them nothing more than pieces of junk, that they don't work, that they, I don't know if Trump has been behind any of the assertions that wind turbines cause cancer or some other equally ridiculous notion such as that. But nevertheless, what advances that the United States has been making in power generation as a result of wind turbines, they have now taken a step back because Well, just sort of like vaccinations, right? So they've taken something that is proven, but doesn't match their ideological bent, and also doesn't match the angry feelings of a lot of their political base, and so they've taken that and they've reduced it and chased it out of town. And so what that means is that there's a whole whack of people down in the United States, whether they're developers, investors, people who are involved in supply chain, any of those things, that are now suddenly left like they've had the rug pulled out from under them, and they've got nowhere to go with their expertise, and so they're kind of stuck. And so along comes Nova Scotia, which is one of our maritime provinces, and it has an awful lot of oceanfront real estate. It's got tides, and basically it's got wind. And Nova Scotia figures that if they plant, and I know you don't plant wind turbines, but if they install wind turbines, that they can generate as much as 40 gigawatts of electrical power. And so the province itself only needs about 4 gigawatts of electrical power, meaning that the province has an opportunity to generate an excess of electricity, which in the past would be a problem because electricity is something that you can't really store it all that well outside of batteries. And so it was one of those you either use it or lose it kind of propositions. And but Nova Scotia is going into this with its eyes wide open. Now, mind you, to reach the potential, or at least the initial potential that they're talking about here, they're talking about 4,000 turbines that would need to be put into place at key areas along the coastline of New Brunswick. And it would be those turbines that would generate electricity to provide power for the needs of Nova Scotia itself as a province, but also to generate that 36 megawatts of excess power that can then be sold. And of course, primarily the targets that we're looking at as consumers or customers are the New England states and New York State. These are places that right now get a lot of their electricity from Newfoundland, Quebec, Newfoundland, Labrador, and Quebec. And so these wind farms off the coast of Nova Scotia will represent just another alternative source of energy. And, perhaps, maybe this is a good point, bad point, but maybe it will create a little bit of competition in the field of electricity, provision of electricity. And that level of competition is good for consumers. Now, it's not great for Hydro-Quebec, and it's not great for whatever the utility in Newfoundland and Labrador is called, because I would guess that competition in the field would cause them to have reduced profits in terms of their own energy generation transmission to the same customers, Northern New England, Northern New York State, that sort of thing. All that being said, though, if they're going to create this infrastructure and they're going to create this project that is going to generate excess electricity, then it seems to me that they need to either transmit that energy, that electricity right away for consumption, for immediate consumption, or they're going to have to install a battery farm like the Oneida folks did in southwestern Ontario. And that would not be the worst thing in the world, because storage of electricity is, in and of itself, an industry that has some promise. Now, the Oneida place, they had their batteries, which are, interestingly enough, made and manufactured by Tesla, public enemy number 2 up here in Canada. Anyways, these batteries, which are the ones being used to store the electricity, I think, are absolutely vital, because if you have consumers or customers that are willing to take your product right away and also to use it right away, then that's all great. But what if something happens somewhere down the road where they just change their mind? You know what I'm saying? And that's what happened to our allies and friends down in the United States, where we took this friendship that was going to go on forever and could never possibly be anything other than the positive relationship that it is, and have them turn around and become hostile towards us, and we forget totally about our history as a nation. I mean, we've been invaded by the United States twice already in our history, and they contemplated doing it a third time. So, I mean, with friends like these, who needs enemies, right? But so back to power generation off the coast of Nova Scotia. It strikes me that that would be a good idea in its own right, but also it would be further enhanced with the production and installation of a battery farm that will take that use it or lose it aspect of power generation or electricity generation. It will take that aspect of it off the table and make it a safer investment. So this is another example of Donald Trump going into a place like a bull in a china shop and smashing things to pieces. But you know, the idea is that, well, what happens with all those china shop employees that have invested all their time and effort and creative talent into making that china shop, which I seem to be using as an analogy for power generation or wind turbine generation down in the United States, as tortured as a metaphor or as an analogy as that might be, nevertheless, Trump's moves, his negative moves down in the United States, have resulted in suddenly this glut of people, whether they be developers or investors or supply management people, to be down in the States and have nowhere to go, because the very industry that they've sunk their heart and souls into is now being run to ground and run out of town rather, by the President of the United States. So these people need someplace to go. And so this is sort of like a reverse brain drain. If you recall, back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the brightest and best of Canada's thinking class would go to the United States because of the possibilities there for greater income and greater potential and all of that kind of stuff. But now here in 2025, with the advent of a lunatic president, we benefit sort of from a reverse brain drain, where all of those resources, both human and immaterial, that were destined for the United States and their power generation industry, now are looking at Canada as a place to come and apply their talents and their thinking and to invest their dollars into the industry that they are experts in. And to them, it doesn't really matter where the dollars come from, if it's wind generated by turbines off the coast of Nova Scotia, or whether it's wind generated by turbines off the coast of California. It doesn't really matter. Money is money. I suppose the difference in value between Canadian and American currencies might have something to say about that, or might have a role to play in that. But nevertheless, they're not making an awful lot of money right now with Trump throwing a wet blanket over everything that they do. So I think this is fantastic news. The Premier of Nova Scotia, a fellow by the name of Tim Houston, what a great name. Like, that guy should be the governor of an American state, but I watch what I say there, because that sounds like Trump in his 51st state. But I mean, if you got a name like Tim Houston, good for you. I mean, you're either going to be the governor of a state or the starting quarterback in a NCAA football program. Nevertheless, this is an example of some forward thinking by that premier of one of our maritime provinces, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. And I absolutely think that the beautiful irony of all of this, coming as a result of Trump and all the negativity that he's brought here, there, and everywhere. This is an example where he's hurt his own nation, which he's fine to do. He's hurt his own country, and yet up here in Canada, we get to reap the rewards and the consequences of that. Actually, there's no other word for it. The stupid policy decision of his. What was once a dirty word now seems to be becoming a cleaner word, which is absolutely appropriate, because as a source of clean energy, we're talking about one of the ways that we're going to produce electricity cleanly in the future.